All right, everybody, thanks for joining our Boston Roundtable series. So this is our third one in the installment of a nationwide tour, and super excited to have everybody here. It's a very diverse panel, although it does have 3 health tech companies, which is going to be super interesting, as I think it speaks to Boston. That and ed tech, which we don't necessarily have, but you know. To get things started, why don't we just kind of we'll start over here with Mike, I guess, and we'll just go through and give us your elevator pitch and tell us, you know, a little bit more about Modulate and your companies, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders at Modulate. We do real-time voice moderation for games and online platforms. So we can sit on top of the game ecosystem, watch as people are having these conversations, initially in a very low-key, privacy-respecting way, but notice when something scary starts to happen and ultimately flag that to the studios so they can take action on everything from hate speech and harassment to the really scary stuff like child grooming or violent radicalization. In terms of traction, I was just talking to Chris earlier today, or I was talking to you 5 minutes ago, but earlier today we finally got to announce a very exciting partnership with Call of Duty. So that's one of the larger studios we've been able to work with, one of the larger studios out there, but has really been a great validation of the fact that the tech we're building is working and is both, you know, providing value for community as well as for the bottom line for the studios.
I'm Sarah Milby, the founder and CEO of Valor Performance. So I will combine the ed tech and health tech worlds, because Valor Coaching, we work with leaders and high performers to sustain their performance during high stress, high pressure environments. We work with leaders and organizations that are good today, but help them become great through our digital coaching platform. I started the business focused actually on revenue generating teams, helping them ignite and sustain their performance. Now we work with leaders cross-functionally, but our fastest growing segment that I'm most excited about is actually in healthcare, working with physicians, clinicians and non-clinicians to give them some leadership skills in the modern healthcare workforce.
Awesome. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Eddie. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Akili. We're a NASDAQ listed public company now as of a year ago. We're one of the early companies in the industry that's called digital therapeutics, which is software as medicine. And our kind of claim to fame at this point is we went a step beyond just software, beyond kind of chatbots and therapy. And we make entertainment platforms that deliver direct neurological medicine. So we have the world's only FDA-approved video game, which is a treatment, prescription-only treatment for children with ADHD. It's called EndeavorRx. That's being prescribed across the country now. And we just 3 months ago released the first non-prescription version of our platform, which is called Endeavor OTC, which is for adults with ADHD and attention issues. And that is pretty exciting. It's taking off. I think it just hit 100,000 downloads in a couple months, and it's showing that people have a big need for cognitive health and brain health, more than we ever even thought when we started this company. So excited to be here and talk to everyone. And we've gone from seed all the way up through IPO, so there's a whole lot of learnings in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Great, nice to meet everybody. My name is Paul Sellew. I'm founder and CEO of Little Leaf Farms, and I believe in this crowd I'm somewhat of an outlier. I am in production agriculture. So my company, we started about 8 years ago, and we're part of the food system transformation. As maybe you know or not know, but we import about 90% of the food that we eat here in New England. And I'm a farm boy from New England. My family is in the ornamental horticulture business in Connecticut. And I pursued food. So we built a world-class, state-of-the-art, highly automated greenhouse in Devens, Massachusetts, where we started. And now, 8 years later, we're approaching 100 million in revenue. We're in 5,000 grocery stores. We have a second operation down in McAdoo, Pennsylvania, where we have 20 acres in production and then a third 10-acre in construction right now. And we're part of this new wave of localized food and avoiding the cross-country transportation, which if you wanted to eat lettuce other than Little Leaf Farms, you'd be buying lettuce literally from a California, Arizona farm. So anyway, nice to be here.
Awesome. I'm Rosa. I'm co-founder of Rupa Health, another health tech startup here. We're Series A And we're essentially a platform for health and wellness practitioners, ranging from MDs to nutritionists and health coaches, to order like specialty and in-depth lab testing for their patients. So anything from like blood draw tests, saliva, food sensitivity, fertility testing, all of that. So kind of a marketplace sitting between patient, practitioner, and lab. Yeah, and we're been around since 2018. We raised like a Series A extension at the end of last year, and got a couple thousand practitioners and clinics using us now. So still very early as far as things go, but it's been an awesome journey.
Great. Paul, I bought some of your lettuce this weekend, actually.
Thank you for
It's
the
delicious. It's delicious. So I'm David. I'm a radiation oncologist, actually, but I am the founder of a company called Primr, and the general category we're in is doctor-patient knowledge transfer. And so what we do is we take those little bespoke hand-drawn images from your doctor's office and turn them into something magical. That's an engaging piece of scalable content. So it's obviously a huge beach or a huge waterfront, but kind of the beachhead vertical we're working in is oncology clinical trials. So we work with small and mid-sized biotech, medical device, and large pharma companies to help them get their clinical trial products through the pipeline faster by better educating patients and practitioners about these complex trials. Help them, we build the tech behind the recruitment and the enrollment. So we basically use education as an engine to advance medicine.
Awesome. So this is where I typically like to get into the stuff that, again, that I kind of pre-mentioned, but things that we can't read about your stories online, right? Like the stuff that happened before you got to where you are now. And I think a lot of that starts from like the idea, why you guys ended up starting these types of businesses. Because to be a founder, I think like takes a certain tenacity, and it's probably just as difficult statistically to be like a successful rock musician as it is to be like a company that gets IPO'd, right? So any of you guys have like some of those stories that you would want to share in the very early days before you kind of like even got to a product, and why did you pursue what you ended up pursuing?
Well, I started Valor because I wish I had Valor. I was working my way up in various digital health startups and taking on leadership roles. And I felt like I was put in a lot of one and done type of training situations, like a workshop. And leadership, as we all know, is constant. Like you're always learning, you're always evolving, especially when everything's shifting around you in the changing environment. And so it was like, what's ongoing? And where's the role of technology to help scale, where like some of the C-suite was getting this like executive coach. But why do we save it for the C-suite? Why can't we think about scaling something like a personalized coach, but with technology? So that kind of got me started. And then when I started asking around just to get customer insight, I had a few slides just to describe my thinking, and that ended up pre-selling. So I worked with a designer, shout out to that designer, because beautiful slides, I have to say, that just to describe the concept. Ended up pre-selling, had 3 alpha customers. I had no product, I had no team, I had no funding, I hadn't even incorporated, but it was like it's go time. There's something here, there's something here. So that was a catalyst for me in the early days, and I will always think about that Cafe Nero downtown Boston as where that first customer said, do you have a contract? I'd love to get early access to this. And I was like, I'll call you back.
I love the not that you were stumbling into it, but that's how I described myself, as like stumbled into it, but you had a different way of like kind of bounding into it. But I always tell people, like, I never wanted to be CEO of a company. That was not a career goal. It may not be a career goal today. I'm a scientist by training. So people are always like, oh, are you a video gamer? And I'm like, no, not particularly. I actually wasn't allowed to have video games much of my life. When I was
As the other gaming founder, same.
Interesting, right? Interesting. So no, and then they'd be like, oh, you must have worked in neurology. And I'm like, no, I have a PhD in biochemistry, biophysics, like I developed drugs. But what got me was the product itself, right? So I was working with this group called PureTech here in Boston, which starts companies. So I was fortunate enough to like not have to be an entrepreneur with zero support. Like I got support because that's what they do. And I got to work with Daphne Zohar, who started PureTech, serial entrepreneur. So I got to learn some of those pieces, but what propelled me into this and why I just kept growing it is I loved building a product and interacting with the product and then seeing what it could do. And for us, what it could do meant not only the performance of it, but also clinical trials and seeing how it could help people. And so it almost became this like thing where every like 6 months or a year, I would like look backwards and be like, whoa, I'm still here. And now we're doing this next big thing. But it was just like this snowball of following day to day the exciting stuff of the product that just keeps you going. And I still think today, in many cases, that's actually what keeps me going.
How old's the company now?
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah, so we've been around 12 years.
And when you guys were starting to develop what came first, the idea or the product?
The idea. So we were like, there's got to be a better. I was working on another business to start to try to treat mental health, depression specifically with a device. And we were like sitting in a room not dissimilar from this, and myself and a couple of people who were working on that company. And we're like, there's got to be a better way than, like a magnetic coil that it felt like we were inventing, a depression treatment that we were calling innovative, but was from, like 1890 or something. And so it was an idea on a board, literally a whiteboard. We're like, what if it could be this? What if it could feel and look like a video game, but the sensory stimulus in it was proven and powerful? And then I spent a whole lot of time just like talking to neuroscientists until we found a technology. But yeah, it was idea, which was inspirational. And then once we found the tech, then for years it was just, can we really build this thing? And every step of the way, it's like, oh, holy shit, yes, we can build this thing. Can we say it? Sorry.
Yeah.
Holy crap, we can build this thing. And that's kind of how the snowball kept going.
So I feel like Eddie and Sarah, you both kind of followed the standard advice of notice a problem and then go off and solve that problem. Let me give a story of someone who completely did not engage with that advice at any point in the process. So for me, it was I met my eventual co-founder as undergraduates at college. We basically said, hey, we really like working with each other and we have lots of interesting philosophical conversations. Therefore, we should found a company together. Okay, cool. What are we going to found our company to do? We have no idea. So we wrote down a list of random ideas that maybe sounded kind of like a company, most of which we didn't actually have any real sort of faith in, but just kind of to play test a little bit and build some muscle memory on what's it look like to build a company and kind of validate that we still enjoyed working with each other. Did that, couldn't figure out anything that we were actually excited about by the time we graduated. So we just decided, cool, we don't have a company yet, but Mike's going to be CEO, Carter's going to be CTO. Let's go find jobs that'll make us good at those things. And at some point, we'll surely find something to build. My co-founder Carter, he went to NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab as a machine learning scientist, small time stuff. And he was working on machine vision technology that ended up kind of having these analogs in the audio space that were what inspired us. But even there, he kind of called me up and said, hey, I'm working on this ML tech. It seems cool. Do you think anyone else is doing this? Do you think that there's a niche for this technology to be unique? And that was the angle that we came at it from. And we spent about 2 years mucking around with this unique technology that no one else had seen before it occurred to either of us to ask, who actually would want this technology? What purpose does it serve other than being cool? So we ended up spending a year from there going and talking to every single industry we could think of that might have any horse in that race. And from there, that's when we finally started to identify the actual problems in the gaming space to look into. But we came at it all completely backwards from how you're supposed to. And so far have made it through okay for what it's worth.
Were there any industries in there that you were surprised were interested in some kind of solution like that? Outside of the gaming that you guys landed on?
Yeah, I think gaming was the most interested. But so actually, winding back, the original tech we had built, it was actually real-time voice changing tech. We did Gen AI before Gen AI was kind of a thing. When we were doing that, we went and talked to podcast companies, audiobooks, marketing, call centers.
Now the Modulate makes sense.
Exactly, yep.
Trying to connect the whole time. Now I got it.
I think the most interesting kind of industry exposure that we had was actually in talking to folks in the call center industry, where every single person, to a man that we spoke to in that space, made a huge point out of do not come into this industry. I've never seen an industry that people dislike from the inside to the degree of the call center space. And I got the sense that that was just, there's so much old technology, it's really hard to actually build on top of those existing stacks. But I think that was not quite answering the question that you asked, but that was the more sort of unique industry experience that we had. A lot of the other reactions of industries was more just in the space of, this seems cool, but we have no idea what to do with it. And gaming were the only ones that they kind of said, oh wait, we actually have an existing problem that this lines up with, and kind of were able to point us in a stronger direction.
Yeah, no, it's great hearing, everyone's journey, right? It's their own unique journey. So mine was, I guess, kind of boring. Started at a grocery store. And like a lot of people, I enjoy a good salad. And, I was disappointed, with what you buy. And as I looked into this, it was interesting that 95% of all the leafy greens are grown in the Salinas Valley in Yuma, Arizona. And big, large California agribusiness companies, and they grow it, package it, and then send it to New England, Boston, which is 3,200 miles away. And so as I looked into that, it was sort of like, okay, I understand why the lettuce is not fresh, right? It's grown thousands of miles away. And, having a greenhouse background, I said, like, well, why can't we address that, right? Because New England is not known for production agriculture. I mean, Boston area is known for a lot of things, but production agriculture is not one of them. But I was graduated from Cornell College of Ag and Life Science, and professor was talking about this notion of peri-urban. So if you look at, the suburbs, pre-World War II, they were farms feeding the cities, right? Now, they're all fancy suburbs, but the basic idea would be using state-of-the-art technology that I found in Finland. Just found out Rosa's from Finland. And in Europe in general is just much more advanced in greenhouse technology than the United States. Brought it over here and started it up, and I just found that people really responded to fresher, better tasting lettuce. It was just that simple. And so as a result, we've just been continuing to grow and getting better and better and better, and the market has responded. So kind of all started just disappointment in sort of the lettuce that you could buy.
That's awesome. So interesting how everyone's story is different. Everyone comes at building a company in a different way. But I think just like Eddie, I never really expected to be a founder or never really set out to build a company. I think, so we started Rupa when I was right out of undergrad. I had studied product design, but long story short, my whole life thought I was going to be a doctor. Grew up around healthcare, parents were in medical devices and pharma, and then was deep in pre-med, shadowing doctors, understanding the healthcare system, and just realized one, being a doctor is not for me, not necessarily what I want to do with my life. But so many people around me are still not doing well. 1 in 2 people has a chronic condition. The number of people I know with conditions like IBS or autoimmune conditions or infertility, these things that we're not actually able to solve super well. Wanted to figure out a way to help more people get better and overcome these kind of chronic conditions they're dealing with. So long story short, pivoted into studying product design. Luckily met my co-founder right as I was graduating, and we kind of set out to build something in this space to bring root cause medicine to more people. And definitely funny, the first year and a half, we were just working out of her living room, hustling, trying to find doctors to talk to us and take us seriously. Pivoted twice. We're building something totally different in the beginning, and then kind of stumbled across the specific pain point around lab testing and ordering labs and getting to the root cause through diagnostics. And then launched a scrappy prototype to 5 doctors and actually saw people using it, engaging with it, and started from there. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it was a fun time, crazy times.
So I started, actually started way back, right after undergrad, teaching undergrads how to take the MCAT. So I was teaching at a whiteboard and did that through med school for just a little cash on the side. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, I probably spent 1,000 hours total teaching undergrad students about basic science concepts to get ready for this test. And just got very accustomed to taking these very complex biochemical systems and turning them into simple visuals to help people understand them. And carried that practice, even though it's not a whiteboard anymore, into the exam room when I meet with my own cancer patients and just draw it out. That's just part of my routine. When I meet a new patient who has cancer, I draw it out for them. This is the anatomy, these are the treatments, kind of how it's gonna work, the side effects and everything. And it really, the moment where I realized I was gonna found a company around this practice was during COVID, because no patients could come with family anymore. So people were coming alone. It's like the most vulnerable moment of their life. They're face to face with their mortality for the first time. They have diagnosis of cancer. And you can just see it as the physician, like the curtains are down, like they are not retaining this information. And it was around then that patients started asking me if they could keep this scribbled piece of paper. I'm gonna rip it off the exam table, they would go home with it. So once they started asking if they could keep it, I'd ask them why, and they're like, well, I'm gonna go home and I gotta explain this to my family, and my granddaughter lives in California, and I don't know how I'm gonna do all this and stuff. So the light bulb went off. I was like, I need to digitize this explanation, and I just kind of went nuts with it at first. I built this huge library of just my own versions of like a digital animated video to explain this stuff to patients, and put it on social media. I wasn't quite sure where I was gonna go. I hired some developers overseas to build a web application so I could distribute these to patients. And I even had doctors sign up and pay me for access to the web app, but engagement was low, unlike you, where you got some doctors that you see they're actually using it. My first like MVP engagement wasn't good. And I'm a bootstrap company, so I was like, I gotta figure this out. So I started calling all these guys who had paid me. I was like, why aren't you using it? And they're like, well, we don't have time to log into yet another platform. So I'm like scratching my head. I'm like, how am I gonna, I don't have any money, like it's this bootstrap company. And right at that time, some principal investigators, the doctors who run clinical trials, came to me and they're like, we've seen your stuff, we need this. Our trial is very complex. It's very hard to explain to patients. We need it in multiple languages, and we need to scale the trial across 40 sites, and we needed to ensure that the education is uniform and high quality. So they paid me to basically create the content, distribute it, and then pull in the engagement analytics and stuff. And then we've just kind of built off of that from there. So it started with more academic studies, but then we got steady traction into industry.
Interesting. Obviously, starting a business is like super hard, and there's trying times throughout the entire process. I'm sure from even your perspective, Eddie, of like going from seed to IPO and the whole nine, right? Like it doesn't probably stop in terms of fires that you're putting out. But has there been any kind of like, interesting stories from your guys' experiences of some of those fires, some of those like times where it felt like, look, we may not make it tomorrow. We may not get past a certain, whatever that pivotal moment is. I mean, I know I've gone through that, being a 3-time founder, like those first 2 were very difficult, but like we're learning exercises for ultimately, the 3rd one now is like rapidly growing and cash flow positive and all these positive things, but it's only because of failing those last 2 times to then know, right? So I don't know if you guys have had similar experiences of like those kinds of learning exercises that may on the surface look like a failure, but in actuality is like a learning.
Sure, all the time. I feel like when you're founding a company as a first-time founder, like everything is a learning experience, but it feels really dire, right? Every time you come up against a new hurdle, you're like, maybe this is just me, but I've at least talked to enough founders and management that those who are willing to admit it feel like there's like a constant level of stress and doubt, right? And they're like, oh my God, is this the major blocker, right? And what I think it feels like to me after a decade is that every one of those are like training moments where they still, the emotion still comes up, the heart rate still rises a little bit, but you can more quickly pivot into like, okay, well, we've solved like 1,000 of these before, so what's the next one? And in retrospect, it's like the one you're dealing with now is such a bigger hurdle. It's like an order of magnitude more dire than the one from 5 years ago, but it still feels like they both felt the same at that moment in time. But that is like, that's an amazing, if we could draw, like if we could use Dave's like thing here, like it means you're getting better and better at like processing and dealing with and then solving more and more complicated problems. So that's how I have felt it, but it's not like, I think people sometimes envision founders and management teams as like being so good at like every like negative hurdle that comes up, you're just like, oh, no problem, let me take this one and work with it. Like, no, in the moment they suck. Like they can feel dire. And so it's more about like exposure therapy. Like how many times can you get that and cross the hurdle and solve the problem? And every time you do, it feels great. And then by the time you're like in the midst of celebrating, there's another hurdle that comes up, and they don't stop really. That's how I feel.
For sure. I mean, I think like that's part of it. It's like a muscle that you can build up over time, right? Like you get calloused over. I mean, now it's like problem solving is the core, I think, of like what leadership does. And so you're constantly juggling that. And if you can accept that problems are going to arise or issues will always arise, the heart rate can monitor itself a little bit lower than the first few times around. But definitely, I think like it's that mindset of just knowing that it keeps popping up. It's always going to keep popping up. But have you guys, anybody else has like gone through that experience of just like, oh, this feels like too much, and then like pace ultimately over time like figures out how to regulate itself?
Sure. So since we have to be very capital efficient. It's like we're basically we're running the company off the revenues. So pretty much everybody on the team is a contractor in some form or another. And there was one period of time where we had an opportunity to land a bigger deal than we would normally have access to at our size. And some of the main contractor I had worked for doing some graphic stuff, we sent the work to her, and I don't know, she was away or something. She wasn't writing back. And I was like, oh, Christ, how are we going to get out of this? This is like a huge opportunity for us. And she eventually did, and we kind of pulled a rabbit out of the hat at the last second, but I was like, we can't be in that position again. And so it was extraordinarily stressful when it happened, and we kind of like lucked our way out of it and kind of like just sort of wiggled out of that problem. But it really, it required like a tremendous amount of focus around like how we're going to solve this problem. So we like build a bigger bench. I went back and sourced through my other customers, like various graphics people who are medically trained through them. So we have like a deeper bench now. And so now when we get new, bigger clients, we'll source it out to a couple of these contractors. And if someone doesn't get back right away, it's no big deal. We've got another one. And what's come out of that is a really cool thing where we get usually products back from both of them pretty quickly, typically. And then we A/B test the two designs with our own set of like branded style and stuff. And we'll send the customer both of those. So they feel like they're getting this super elite service where they're getting to choose between two like very nicely done products. But we're also kind of learning a lot about our customers but it's the customer preference, but also we're like kind of building out a deeper bench of our team.
I mean, I'll just say, I think for me, starting and running a business these past, 6 years has been the hardest thing I've ever done. Especially, I mean, I was also starting and building a family. I think there's this quote that I like always repeat to myself. It's a Ken Griffey Jr. quote, which is like, you win, you smile, you come back the next day. You lose, you smile, you come back the next day. And that's like entrepreneurship. It's like so much just about like hanging on. just hang on, because you'll reap the benefit of those learnings, and you'll live to like fight another day to either pivot or see an opportunity like we are right now working with hospitals and health systems, but that wasn't obvious when we first started. So yeah, it's been constant, especially these past few years. Like, we had an office in Back Bay, and then COVID, and then it was like social justice, uprising, and all of the injustices in our society that, by the way, I'm in leadership coaching. And so I have a global team that looks to me to lead during those times, and I'm thankful for it because it holds me accountable. And I don't think I would still be running Valor if I didn't have Valor. Candidly, I use it all the time. But it's hard. I mean, leadership is hard. And these past few years, and then you mentioned in your prep, just like Silicon Valley Bank, like it's just, you're always like, what's the flavor of the day of, the fire that you're going to be putting out? But yeah, hardest thing I've ever done. Most invigorating and rewarding, and kicks my butt every day.
You have a strong support system at home, though?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
I think support in general. I mean, look, I have a coach, a performance and leadership coach. I have a team of leadership and performance coaches and a great team in general at Valor. Great advisors, and I think that's critical.
Yeah.
Great also founder community where we can compare notes, commiserate, and celebrate, because you got to celebrate those small wins. And then for sure on like the home front, just having a supportive partner and child care is critical to be able to put my energy into what I love. I think that's another thing though, that a lot of entrepreneurs don't appreciate how much your identity gets caught up with your own business, and so you have to figure out ways to sustain your own performance, right? Because otherwise you're going to run yourself to the ground.
It becomes very personal, I feel like. And I don't know if there's a way to separate that necessarily all the time. Like, I think you maybe get better at it over a certain amount of period, but somehow, but like, yeah, I do see a lot of founders that tie their identity to their business, and yeah, it's, I mean, either healthy or unhealthy, I don't know, but like, I mean, that's maybe part of the reasons why there's that obsessive nature to it, to get to ultimately building it as, as big as you can possibly grow it, right?
There's a nuance there of like tie your identity to your business or tie your identity to sort of your capacity within the business. Like for me at Modulate, one of the practices we do to try and have the team get to know each other is when you come in, you're asked to try and come up with one sentence that kind of sums up the way you live your life. It's not a trivial thing to do. People spend a lot of time thinking about it. Mine for the last 6 years has been the same. Fail often, but never twice. For me, that's the piece of my identity that I'm so attached to. It's not that I am a successful CEO in the sense of I never make mistakes. I fail all the time. But the thing that is really important to my identity is that I'm someone who doesn't make the same mistake twice. I'm someone who's capable of learning and who's continuously doing it. And so I know that anything that I wasn't good at yesterday, I'm going to be better at today. And that feels a lot easier to be able to hold on to all of the time, because that's not a thing where even the most catastrophic mistakes break that part of your identity. They all just feed into opportunities to continue growing yourself and continue pushing forward.
And you too, like, I mean, you mentioned to me earlier that your co-founder wrote the first line of code back in 2015, right? And so you guys didn't raise any capital for 4 years?
That's right.
So like, how did you guys operate, or how did you guys get to that place? And then what propelled you to ultimately raise any capital at that point?
How did we operate? Out of the co-founder living room. That's the classic strategy, right? But no, I mean, like I said before, this was something we came at in a very circuitous direction. For a long time, this was a side project that, to be perfectly honest, I don't think either of us would have actually bet that it would turn real. I think we were passionate about it and wanted to mess around and see what could happen, but we didn't know what was actually going to come of it. It was, I think the point at which it started to really crystallize was when my job right before Modulate, I was working under Paul English, one of the co-founders of Kayak.com, at his startup Lola Travel. And Paul, being a serial entrepreneur, my job was technically, I was the machine learning engineer there. My actual job was just pester Paul all the time. And I spent that whole time kind of asking him, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And I say this with all the respect for Paul I could possibly sort of imbue into the sentence. One of the biggest things that I learned was that he was extremely fallible. right? The incredibly successful serial entrepreneur was not some magical entity that had all the right answers, but instead I was learning, oh, okay, I can start to unpack mechanically what allows a human being to operate at this level and what some of those habits are that they develop. So for me, that was, I think, the thing that helped me kind of crystallize on, hey, there's a way to go from messing around with a side project where you don't have any idea how to do business or do any of these things, and start taking yourself there and start learning those things. That allowed me to kind of throw myself into the deep end in a way I don't think I otherwise would have known how to do.
Yeah, makes sense.
Going back on this identity point, because I think about it all the time. I have like a list of things I've learned, and at the top of my list of things I've learned is you are not your company, right? And I think the identity, but fine line, because I do think what makes entrepreneurs and persistent entrepreneurs great is caring about their company as if it's life or death. So it's a fine line. So for me, what I'm every day trying to grapple with and kind of perfect the balance in, and there's probably no perfect balance, is I'm not my company, or more importantly, my identity is not this one vision of success that I have with this company, because who knows what makes that successful for my life or for the world or for anything else. But I can still care about it like hell. And I think that's the difference, because I find that we want, and frankly our investors want, and if I'm an investor, I'm going to be looking at people that want to live and breathe this every day and make sure they do everything they can to make it successful. But I think it's toxic if internally we're like, I am only as good as this company is today. I think that's the one toxic part. But I think you can have it both, actually. I think you can separate yourself from this thing you're doing, but still care about it to make it really, really, really successful. And that balance is like, I don't know where I am. Depending on the day, I'm doing really well or I'm failing miserably, but that balance seems important.
Yeah, I
to me.
mean, the whole notion of building a team, right? So I'm sure this group of people here, shares the resilient thing you have to have if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur. And so that drive and everything we have to go through to establish a successful company, once you get it to a certain level, you're going to need to, have people join you, work-life balance, and all those other things. So, I just don't think you can scale the company, being the all-intense, entrepreneur who's going to be doing everything all the time, right? It's not a scalable model. But I'm so thankful that I started small, because I didn't know what I didn't know in certain cases, right? And I bootstrapped it, signed the debt personally, went to a good friend, so I didn't do a Series A venture deal. And because it was kind of crazy, growing lettuce outside of Boston, right? This is not something that people were lining up and knocking my door down saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So we had to figure it out, and we made like all the mistakes that you could have made, and that the resilience have to kick in. And I had an unbelievable startup team that are still with me to this day, which is probably my proudest accomplishment. And we just worked through the problems, and our finished vendor worked through the problems with us. And we came out the other end, and we learned, and then we turned the business around financially, got it to cash flow positive, made a lot of other mistakes that I won't go into. But then all of a sudden you're financeable. Then you're making money. And at that point then I was able to raise, outside capital and do it. But I'm so thankful that I started small.
Paul, I'm curious, did you intentionally, was that the plan? Let's go get cash flow positive and then raise? Or?
Yeah, I was a little bit sort of out of the mainstream, because Rosa asked me when I told her what I was doing, oh, you must be a vertical farmer, right? Maybe others have, well, the vertical farms basically are failing. They're all losing money. They've raised several $billion, and so, but it was a land grab and raise all the capital when money was free and all of that, right? And I looked at it from the standpoint of unit economics. I needed to establish positive unit economics. It was a core value from the beginning. It wasn't like a land grab. we're going to lose money and we're going to get there. And I'm so thankful for that. Because other entrepreneur friends, more on the West Coast than the East Coast, the land grab, we got to get it, it doesn't matter. Paul, you're too focused on EBITDA, right? All of that. And now fast forward to today, and I'm so thankful for that, because look at the capital raising environment now. Pretty much dead, or really tough.
Unless you're cash flow positive.
Yeah,
I mean,
unless you're cash
100%.
flow.
I have to build on that because having solid unit economics and just business fundamentals. And I came from West Coast and the Silicon Valley environment and saw how that story played out a few times for myself and others. And when I came here, that's exactly how I thought about it too, Paul. And taking as little outside capital because I didn't want to hinder the discipline that is required. I mean, let me be clear. Sometimes I'm very jealous of the West Coasters or any company that's raised a gajillion dollars and they can use it as they wish. But now, having solid sight to the
Well, we have the
positive,
last laugh right now. It's
well,
based
now,
on the-
yes. Well,
yeah.
and now isn't that so funny? Because now the market is kind of telling us good business fundamentals do win.
I think two quick things. Like one, the people who raised $1 billion can't use it as they wish. They're entirely beholden to their investors that had a specific plan for it. But
Fair.
it's also interesting for me. Like I'm in a similar boat here, where I'm an extremely conservative founder when I'm thinking about all of the financials, and that's obviously worked well in this climate. I keep going back and forth on whether that means I did something right. Realistically, if you had thrown me into the climate that we had 10, 15 years ago, I would have done the same things and I would have been wrong to have done them in that climate. I think it was just more the way that I am, the way that I operate, happened to coincide well with the economic climate that we're living through today. I don't feel like I can take credit for kind of reading the market and adapting my business style in that way. I'm curious to hear from y'all if any of you feel like you have the knack for that kind of adaptive approach, or if it is really just like, yep, this is the way that we are and this is our time, and there'll be different sort of economic climates where other kinds of founders will have their success too.
I mean, I think like working with several of the VCs in the LA area, I mean, I think like primarily like in LA, it's not like Silicon Valley. It is very much more of like a scrappy mentality, especially outside of media types of plays, right? And so I'd say that it is super important. And the way that I run my startup too is that being cash flow positive within 3 months of us launching was mission critical for me, like as quickly as possible. We did end up raising a little bit of money, but we've still been cash flow positive since then for the past year and a half. And so I think that comes also from this idea that one of my mentors gave me about dilution and like, you know, what are you doing this for? Ultimately, what is your end game, right? And it's like, he's somebody who started his first startups. They sold it for, I mean, I think like at $1 billion or something situation, but he had less than a fraction of % of it by the end of the day. His last startup, he ended up selling to Gusto for like $30-40 million, and it was the only signature required on that acquisition deal. And so the biggest financial outcome was the latter versus the former. And I think that made me think a lot. And that's something I talk to a lot of founders about too, is just like, when you're taking external capital, like in our last roundtable too, there's a fintech company, but he spoke about like you as a founder really need to be financially literate around the different funding options, because somebody's making money off of those deals, or there's risks that are being laid out that you may or may not be aware of as a founder, because it looks good on paper, like, but there's always going to be something attached to it. So I think I think to answer your question is that there's these two different perspectives, right? So it's like one is dilution. So more selfishly as a founder to think about it that way, but also like capital is super, super expensive now. So you are going to be diluting a lot more than you would have before. And is that worth it to you? I know another founder who's like, has to sell for 50 million for him to feel like he is going to break even on his time that he spent for the last 7 years on his startup, right? It's like, and that's crazy to think about, that you have to have that for him to substantiate maybe like, you know, you get $1 million out of it or something like that. So I don't know if you have any stories.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, the one thing I've learned, because this isn't my first company, boy, the importance of the partners you bring on board. is just so fundamental. And then, of course, you have this issue when you take a lot of the financial risk up front, which I did with Little Leaf. I was the controlling shareholder. When you don't take the financial risk up front, you're working for the investors, right? So that's different dynamics. So, having partners in the business where there's real trust and they're going to give you the time to go through the ups and downs, versus the overreactions and, the making decisions before they should be made, right? Certain things just take time. And that to me is so fundamental. I'd love to hear other stories about that, but I know it's very basic thing to say, have great partners, but it's hard to do. Hard to do.
That's for sure.
I intentionally didn't raise. I mean, I was starting Primr in 2020, 2021, so money started really flying around, and it was tempting, but Eddie said earlier, if he was an investor, he's looking for people who are going to just go all the chips of their life, like all in on this business, and I think that's exactly what I would do. If I'm looking to back people, I want people who are like, there is no question, you are all in. I thought that I would be better at my job as the founder and CEO of this business if I still have a foot in the door of clinical medicine. And so it took me a while to kind of wrestle with that conflict, but ultimately it became clear that I would be better at actually both jobs if I was doing both. I don't know that that's going to be true forever, so I'm constantly retesting that dynamic, but that allowed me to give myself the permission structure to go down a bootstrap path and not grab at the free money that was flying around. I didn't have to pitch venture capitalists. I did have to pitch my wife because I had to withdraw some money from the from the family savings. It's even tougher, as you said. You're going to lay your plan out there, and you're going to make sure there's a clear vision, and it's a huge problem if But she's been incredibly supportive, and basically it allows us to kind of together sort of keep the culture of like the family and the business and everything sort of in balance and harmony, and it's worked really well, and I'm really glad that I didn't go and raise. I don't think there's anything. I think venture capital is like a beautiful thing for the right market, for the right kind of business. Like, to build world-changing businesses, you need venture capital. It accelerates everything. But for a first-time founder who is doing something that's very niche, I needed some space and some bandwidth to like bump up against the walls of like, all right, how am I going to build this? Where are the problems? Where are my blind spots? I need to learn about marketing and sales, building a team, defining a culture. And so I'm really glad I gave myself the space to do that on basically my own dime for several years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I really like what you're talking about. Situationally, it is different, and let's be honest, revisionist history, we can all paint revisionist history. But different businesses, and depending on what your goal is, require different capital structures. So I come from a very different world, though not a different view, interestingly. But for our business, we wanted to change the world. We wanted to introduce the first ever of its type of medicine and convince people you could prescribe software. And interestingly, to build a business like that, you have to invest not like $1 million or $500,000 of your own money to get to like positive unit economics. You have to invest like $50 million to be able to develop a product, run clinical trials, get it through the FDA, and then be able to sell it. So there's literally no choice. You can't build that as a positive unit economic business. So I say that representing one category of companies that needs to raise at-risk venture money, and you necessarily get diluted, and you necessarily then have investor demands that are different. Interestingly, we certainly also, I founded the company 12 years ago, so we were growing over these last decade. We were growing in much of the heyday of like, don't worry about profitability. It's all about, you can, as long as you're hitting big milestones and the total TAM is still massive, then you don't even have to think about profitability. Well, that clearly all has changed. So even businesses, so where I'm like agreeing is even businesses that either had a requirement that they couldn't be profitable early on, or fell into, I guess, the trap, or to Mike's point, I don't know if it's a trap. It was just how it was. I call it the Twitter effect, because back when I was learning how to start companies, everyone pointed to Twitter as a positive, and including investors. They would be like, yeah, look, Twitter, they're not profitable, but it doesn't matter. they're changing society. They have, whatever, hundreds of millions of users. Everyone would talk about that.
The lesson is if you're not profitable, you'll get acquired by Elon Musk.
Maybe. But interestingly, I wouldn't necessarily view they're still unprofitable, but their ridiculously unprofitable phase, I wouldn't view that as failure in that phase, because the goal was not, okay, in 5 years I'm going to exit with $10 million and walk away. And what the goal was change society in terms of how people communicate and consume information. So they did that. At some point, though, it comes back to, okay, at some point you got to build a lasting profitable business. So like us as a public company, cool. Now the screws are on to get us to profitable as quickly as humanly possible. I just think it's more nuanced in terms of the type of goal you have, the type of company you want to build. I do think what I love that I heard that sounds like vast agreement on is like, what is your goal? And being extremely crisp about what is your goal. Some people's goal is, I just want to get this thing to the next milestone. Some people's goal is, I want salad I can eat myself. I don't know, or I want to build a profitable business, or I want, as I think often I talk to a lot of founders, they can fall into a trap of not actually knowing what the goal is. They're just on this hamster wheel of building, and what's the goal? I'm not really sure. I'm just building a company.
Well, to be fair,
That's
I
a
feel
problem.
like there's an imposed expectation of the goal. I feel like if you get caught up into whatever the latest, I don't know, in my world, TechCrunch, big company, whatever that press release is, you can read a imposed goal of what success is. It really comes down to how do you view success? Yeah. And for me, what I continue to think about and wrestle with is giving myself options. I guess another way to say that, ensuring I have control. Because I don't want to be swept away and then wake up one morning and it's this is not at all why I started this business. I want to be able to lead aligned with my and our values. That means so much to me, and do it our way. And so scenario planning, I feel like, is just a part of the job, because everything is uncertain. So scenario planning for me has just been so helpful to feel like I have some locus of control, and knowing okay, when I get to this milestone, it's kind of like what you were saying. It's separating, this is very performance psychology, which we lean on a lot, separating the outcome from the process steps. And so then being focused on the process steps, say, okay, when I get to there, then I know that if it goes this way or this way or this way, here's how I'll tackle it. And it's a little bit more okay, all right, instead of unruly, unwieldy.
I want to build on that a little. I totally agree with everything you're saying, and tying it back to the kind of funding question, how do you find those partners? How do you find the right partners? For me, early on, I kind of looked at that of, I have a specific goal in mind, and said, oh, I want to go find funders that share that goal vision, that are going to be aligned with me in terms of what it is that I want to build. And that is one way that you can bring in funders who are going to be good partners to you, but I actually think it's kind of brittle in the worst way. What I've found more success with is find funders who want to bet on you. Not bet on the specific vision, but say, hey, I bet if I back this person or this team, they're going to do something successful that will make me a bunch of money. And the benefit there is, if, as we did in our case, you have to pivot, you have to reevaluate what it is that you're doing. The people who originally said, oh yeah, we're totally aligned with the vision, they're now trying to push you along a certain track. The people who bet on you are saying, well, look, you're the expert who's spending every single day of your life thinking about this stuff. If you think this is the right call, tell me how I can help. And that's ultimately going to be the better relationship.
I think that's a really important point. And I would add, before you take money from somebody, do reference checks on them. It's no different than when you're employing somebody, right? Call other CEOs of companies and find out how it's like to work, with that group. I think it's really important. And the other thing, Eddie, on sort of the goal, right? I mean, I think you can get confused. We asked ourselves this question, why do we exist? And we said to transform the way food is grown.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we did that because that's kind of a big, hairy, audacious goal. And it kind of helped my team when we're going through hell at the beginning.
Totally.
Because there's a bigger goal out there, right? Of course, transforming the way leafy greens is grown, because transforming the way food is grown is a much broader thing. But I think companies get confused sometimes about why they exist versus what they do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think it's important to differentiate those two things.
Yeah, I call those, what you talked about, the BHAGs or whatever, I call those internally the North Star. And that to me is like, a North Star is not actually something you achieve. It's actually not even a goal, like I want to get to the North Star in our natural parlance. It's the thing that you're like looking at that centers you, that guides you. So I 100% agree with that. It's like, why do you exist is your North Star? And actually, back to the investor point, what I've found the most helpful and the ones that have gone the most wrong are when people don't align with that. Because the North Star, it should not be defined as like what you do in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is when they're like, I'm betting on this because the thing you're going to do in 18 months is going to work or not. Like, that's bad alignment versus this big change you want to affect down the line is why I'm at this business. Because I do think it is part and parcel with our jobs as founders and managers of companies to actually convince our stakeholders, whether it's our employees or our investors, when we're pivoting. Like you can't always have people that just buy into and trust you for being the brilliant founder. So that's our job, and that's okay. But the best alignment is when they're going to push you on it and make sure that that's a good plan, but they're on for the North Star. That's what they want to see as well. That alignment to me is like the most pristine.
So in that sense, is pitching basically articulating that North Star?
I think
Because then you're basically selecting out the people who are in agreement with
making damn sure they agree with that North Star. So we've turned away in our early life, and I'm so glad we did, turned away investors who, once you got deeper into the conversation, you realized they loved what we were doing, but they were looking for a nearer term win that was actually off path of the North Star. It was not the thing we wanted to affect in the world. And it started to show itself in terms, but you could have squinted and looked at it and been like, well, it's good money. Like, and they're savvy investors. They never would have been on board for what we're doing now 10 years later, when we've had to go through different pivots because we're still going toward that North Star. So yeah, I think you almost have to like articulate it, and then it's an interesting concept. Like, often teams will do what you said now. They'll do it internally, right? But being able to articulate that externally. We've found it in business development, not necessarily, I do it with investors. I don't run a workshop or anything with our investors, but I often will say, this is what we're trying to change in the world, like, just so like, and make sure they're on board. But with strategic partners, with like business development vendors, that actually has it's the most convincing. It's the best sales pitch and then when you're aligned, you can do some great things together.
Super interesting. We're up at time, and I know we could probably keep going on for forever. But I'd like to open up for a couple of questions from anybody that's here, if you guys have any, to get some insights from this great panel. Did anybody have any questions?
You mean, is it okay do you think it's a good idea to take money from corporate venture capital? Is that the...
Yes.
No.
That's very binary.
I turned those opportunities down because of the inherent conflict of interest.
I'm not as strong on that point. But I appreciate Paul's definitive answer. We have corporate VCs on our cap table, multiple, who have actually been great investors, and they helped us anchor other investors. So it might depend on the industry, right? And it might depend on the kind of conflict. So within healthcare, it used to be like a black mark, right? If you got a pharma corporate arm, like, good luck doing a deal with any other pharma on earth. But that in healthcare, it's changed a lot, where it isn't necessarily like a stiff arm Heisman to future partners. I think more and more corporate VC arms can act as true fiduciary investors, but they have positive signals to the environment. But I would go back to what Paul said, is it's doubly important to do diligence on them to make sure that they're not the type of corporate arm that's going to try to pull strings or strong arm deals or anything like that.
I have to say, this is one of the fastest hours I think I've ever sat through.
Yeah, it goes by fast. Yeah, it does always go by fast.
I think your gut, so this is, I'm mentioning this now because maybe it's useful for this conversation too. I had written a note before because we had prep questions of what might come up, and some of the stuff didn't. But you seem to have a pretty strong gut. I can hear in your question that you have kind of a strong gut, and you're like really debating this one. I think often like you have to trust your gut as a founder and an operator. And the truth is, like, no one knows the freaking answer. Like I have learned this time and time again in 10 years. No one has the answer. Certainly not the people sitting on your board or the people that have put in money, or certainly not the people that most vociferously will tell you, oh, here's what you should do with your business. So the person that has the answer more often than not is the person that every day is sitting in this business and growing this business. And when you have, like, I've learned to listen to my gut a lot more when I'm, like, I can logic it out and say, well, I can convince myself that this is a good idea. But often when my quick reaction, and anyone who's studied psychology knows, often that kind of deeper seated reaction is a really strong guiding principle.
Yeah, I would go spin off that a little bit further too. I think it starts with their gut to create the hypothesis. What we like to do is always test too with the market. So,
Totally.
Right, so like getting that.
Oh yeah, please don't let it be said that like just do what you feel.
Just build this and it'll
no,
come.
no.
But I mean, yeah, to that. But I think adding on to that too is the hypothesis starts from your gut, and then you take it to the market and then help quantify that.
Validate it.
Yeah, to validate.
I think the combination is like you do the math, you do the research, and then you throw it away at the end, and you just do the thing that, having been the person who did the research, you ultimately formed a gut opinion around.
There's no perfect answer until you can get quantitative data that it's working.
I was really, really green. So I found it very useful to just kind of like, here's the word bank of startup words, like just to like get the vocabulary down. And so it was just very useful for me as a first-time founder to just interact with a lot of other people in this space, kind of like molecules bumping up against each other, which in my prior life, I had no exposure to that. For me, it wasn't, I haven't, actually on the drive here, I did do a call with another on-deck person, and it was very helpful. But I have to say, like, once I kind of went off and launched, I didn't go back and leverage the community all that much. But I'm bootstrapped. Others who have gone on to fundraise, it has been a very useful community for fundraising opportunities, connections to investors. There's a very active Slack. And it's, you don't get diluted. You pay a fee and you get in there. And so unlike YC, where they're going to give you some seed funding and they're going to take some equity, this is something, if you want to maintain all your equity at the end of the experience, it's a good option.
I'd say to piggyback off that, I work with an accelerator, Mucker Capital, and their portfolio companies through the accelerator. I would, as a founder and then also going through that experience, I think it's like, it really, if you're a first-time founder, I can see a lot of value in those types of things. I also think it does provide a semblance of community. I think it depends on the accelerator program too. Like I think there's, the YCs of the world, the tech stars. I think we do a really good job with what we do at Mucker. Like I help build out the growth team, so we help you actually like take a lot of technical founders and help them build their go-to-market strategy in the very beginning, which is one of the more critical parts for technical founders. So I think it just depends on who you are and you assessing where you stand. If you have a really great co-founder, it may not necessarily matter, but if you're kind of like forging your path on your own and you need to learn really quickly, it's a good way to do it.
I think unless you've sold into insurance before, And because because you're looking for the problem to solve, you don't have one that necessitates insurance. I would strongly urge not to look for a problem that necessitates insurance, because the insurance industry, unless you've sold into them before and you have those connections, is extremely or unless it's a problem that is an absolute no-brainer, massive cash savings. Those things are so few and far between that there are a whole lot of problems that patients themselves or the medical system, like whether it's clinician offices or hospital systems themselves, would pay for it. So my advice is you have to align it with someone who's going to pay. That a lot of people do make that mistake. They're like, here's the problem we solve, but they've never really aligned it with someone who's going to pay. But trying to necessitate all those stakeholders plus insurance has to pay at the end of the day is really, really difficult. I mean, you're then putting yourself at like a infinitesimal chance. And we've been in that situation, frankly, in one line of our business. It's very, very, very difficult.
It's very frustrating. Complex and very messy business. But I would say probably the best approach, just in terms of advice of like how to identify real problems, is just talk to patients and doctors. There's a lot of problems. I mean, it's such a huge waterfront. You can never boil the ocean, not to mix metaphors, but like you really need to be incredibly specific in healthcare about the problem you're going to solve, and you can build off that once you have traction, but it needs to be a very precise solution, and you need to like nail that solution, and then you can build off that.
Often in healthcare, I've seen people build businesses that like sort of solve a problem for a couple different stakeholders. My advice in healthcare always, a lot of people come and I always give this advice, is like make damn sure you're solving at least for one of those stakeholders, a critical problem for them, right? Like a critical problem. So like when Dave described his business and what he went through as a clinician, my guess is every single person in here was like, as a patient, has been like, oh yeah, I've had that problem. And you talk to doctors who all said the same, like, so that was an immediate, like, wow, like this is a problem, no brainer, hands down. I have a problem with this every day and I need it solved. And so making sure that it rates like 9 or 10 out of 10 as like, this is a problem I have and I want it better, is like the best advice I can give. And then you'll have the great ideas about how to solve that.
I think the only thing I'll add onto that is to also like ask how they buy. How do they buy? What's their buying process like? How do they evaluate new things? Depending on the different types of medical practices, they do all kinds of different things, right? So, yeah, I've worked with like companies that sell into private practices, and it's very common that they'll do like lunch and learns or something to that effect, right? So like just understanding from when I'm taking this to market, like how I'm going to actually do it, and understanding from as you're having these conversations, not just about the problem, but like how are you going to overcome the hurdle of driving the awareness that problem exists? Because in go-to-market, that's usually the biggest thing, right? It's like how are you going to build trust with somebody enough that they're going to listen to you, right? Not even about the fact that you have this cure for whatever crazy thing it might be.
Well, furthermore, I think with go-to-market and when there's such complex incentive structures like in healthcare, I think you really need to think about where are you adding value, but also like healthcare is this big, giant market, and thinking about where to start and where to have like a proof point. So like a private practice versus an academic medical center versus a rural hospital, like these are very different buying motions. These are very different settings. And I think a lot of people skip over, like because it's like you have that vision, you skip over the discipline of your ideal customer profile and being so clear on that and where to start, which then may evolve into a bigger market, but being super disciplined to start, I think is critical.
Look at like TAM, SAM, SOM analysis. I think that's also really important. Like understanding your product's never going to be perfect out of the gate. So it's like what's actually obtainable today versus what you think it's going to be.
So attracting and then retaining. I think I learned this the hard way a couple times. I would hire always for behaviors and not expertise. So hire for the behavior you want, like how you want that person to approach the job, what type of behavioral profile they have, and not like, oh, here's the resume of, the industry they're in. Because often, especially in innovative business, I don't know what type of, unless you're, okay, I should caveat that. If you're building a business that has been done like 50 times over and this is just the 51st version of it, then fine. Hire someone with like a long resume that knows how to do the exact thing you're trying to do. But in innovative businesses and like real startups, I have found more often than not that type of experience becomes a massive liability, and you end up having to unravel that because someone's just trying to apply a template to a business that's new. Whereas the behavior you want at your stage, you can almost always pinpoint. Scrappiness, problem solving, get things done, whatever it happens to be at the time. And the way that spans into retention is because the biggest retention problem is people don't love the environment, right? But if you get people that are in a behavior of the environment you're trying to drive, there's like a lot of alignment there. So that's something that I wish someone had like walked me through, and I still have to remind myself of all these years later. But I've stepped in that pile a couple times.
I'm also going to say, especially for early stage companies, just be really, really transparent and treat your people as adults. They're going to have in the back of their head, oh, there's an economic downturn, could layoffs be happening? What's going on? Oh, this deal fell through. The thing in the back of their head is worse than reality almost every time. It feels scary to go and say, here's the true bad thing, because it is bad sometimes. It is genuinely scary, but the thing that they're thinking is going to be worse if you don't give them the visibility into what's going on and show them the path that you're charting for how to move forward from that.
I like what Paul said earlier about being clear on like the mission, the vision of the business. So someone's in it for that and wanting that journey. I've made a lot of mistakes. I think the biggest one though is, and when you're small and growing, you're so like desperate to get someone just like in the spot, and so just hiring too fast, and then being like, uh-oh. And so it's so hard to do the classic like hire slow, fire fast. But I've learned that that's the way to go.
I've hired psych majors. Like that's been like the underlying theme for some reason. Yeah, like, and then I would say, yeah, I don't know. They ended up they would bring it up.
Keep going.
Well,
Heard anything. Hire some majors.
No, like our head of sales and then our head of customer success are both psych majors, and we didn't plan that accordingly, but like we've had a few others that are also ended up being psych majors, and they just ended up, but because we hired behaviorally, I mean, we ask personality questions, like stuff like, what is one of the most difficult obstacles you had to overcome in your life, and how did you do that? What's the worst job that you had? Like some of these underlying questions are character defining. That's part of our interview process. That's helped me, I think, like get people, the right kind of people into our company, but also, to Mike's point, the transparency thing. They all know where we are. They see our financial statements. And at least the head of each department knows that. So we're very clear of like where everything is.
I wouldn't say this was intentional, but I generally like pay people gig work before we bring them in kind of regularly. Mm-hmm. So it's basically they're getting paid, but as a tryout. And it's like very low risk on both sides. If they don't like me, they can walk away. If there's been people who I thought were going to be outstanding, they had great resumes, and like their work product was just like not there. So it's fine. Just stop calling them to do more work. It's very hard to find what it's going to really be like to work with someone. So that's why, maybe just work with them for a little bit and pay them, and then see if it works.
We've done that a ton through our career in jobs you wouldn't think that you can do that in, but the way you can always sell it to them for the same thing. We always call it try before you buy, and we say it exactly to them too. Hey, we're a pretty unique environment. You may not want to work with us either. So try before you buy on both sides, and most of the time, you learn real quick.
Awesome. I think we're on time, so I know Paul has to take a call shortly here, so we're going to wrap it up. But I wanted to say thank you for everybody for participating. We'll be sharing this video to everybody that attended as well, so you guys can see this and share it around as you see fit. But again, thank you. This is super enlightening, great stories, great journeys. Continued success in each of you guys' endeavors, man.
Thanks for organizing.
Yeah, of course, thanks. Cool. Thanks. Yeah, thank you guys.
That was fun.
Yeah, it's good.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was way more fluid than I thought it would be. It was good in a good way. Like,
Yeah.
Really good fluid discussion. Paul, I love what you built, man. It's impressive.